Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany, and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and we are delighted to have you with us today. For today's discussion, we are joined by two German economic policy experts to discuss an important, but at least in the US, underreported development in Europe. Professor Dr. Michael Hüther is the director and member of the executive committee of the German Economic Institute, and Professor Dr. Monika Schnitzer is professor of economics and chair of comparative economics at the Ludwig-Maximilians-University in Munich. Herzlich willkommen. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
We will post the bios of our two speakers in the chat. And I would like to start by trying to set the stage for our conversation today. Last July, the 27 EU member states agreed to allow the European Commission to raise up to 750 billion euros through capital markets to pass the money on to the member states which were worst hit by the pandemic. Payments are to be made in the form of grants and loans through jointly agreed reform and investment plans. This debt-financed stimulus package has to be ratified by each national parliament, and the Bundestag passed the ratification law with an unusually large majority of about 75%. The Bundesrat, or upper house, followed suit. The law has to be signed by President Frank-Walter Steinmeier before it can come into effect. But late last month, the EU's recovery fund hit a roadblock after Germany's constitutional court said that the president may not sign off on legislation ratifying the EU's recovery fund. At the center of the controversy are questions about how new debt is being taken on. So before we dive into the recent developments and discuss where we are now and what the outlook is for the coming months and indeed the rest of the year, Monika Schnitzer, can you talk a little bit about the concept behind the recovery fund and the concerns of the Frugal Four, or Austria, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Sweden, with regard to this measure?
Yes, I'm very happy to do so. So let me take you back to the start of the pandemic. All of a sudden, all over the world, countries experienced this pandemic crisis, and so did the European Union member states. They all have been plunged into an economic crisis through no fault of their own. And that exactly is part of the motivation to have this recovery fund. So some countries had a larger crisis, some were less in the crisis. That depended very much on the severity of the infection and also on the structure of the industries. Southern European countries, for instance, they have been hit particularly hard because they depend very much on tourism, and tourism was hit very hard. So when then the EU got together to discuss this fund, it was to some extent a sign of solidarity, but it also was taking into account the fact that in Europe, we are very strongly intertwined economically, and therefore it should be in the interest of each member state to help each other out, because only if everybody starts growing again, we will have this economic interaction that we are so fond of and that is so much contributing to our strength, to our economic strength. So what was then new? The new thing was that the EU is taking on debt by itself. And the question then is, who will be repaying this debt? Of course, the member states are responsible for repaying the debt. But the function is really, or the key is really, that they will be contributing to repaying this debt in the same way as they contribute to the household, to the budget of the EU in all other respects. And only if this did not work out because, say, a country goes bankrupt, then other countries would have to step in. But that's exactly the issue now at stake. How likely is it that some countries will be more responsible more responsible than usual for the general budget in this particular case. And that's the concern of some people who then went to court and said, okay, we are not in favor of this. We are very much worried. And so this is how this whole procedure then started.
So let me ask one quick follow-up. As I mentioned at the beginning, my understanding was that some of the funding would be granted in the form of grants, but other funding would be granted in the form of loans, which would be paid back. Can you tell us sort of how much of this is allocated to grant making, how much of it is allocated to loans? Because I would think that if more of the money were allocated to loans, that might take away some of the concerns or lighten some of the concerns that some of the people have about this debt question.
So in the beginning, the idea was really to have this all in form of grants. But then, as you said, there were these frugal 4 countries who said, no, this is not going to happen. So in the end, the agreement was to have a bit more than half of the sum in form of grants. So that's around 319 billion euros. And the rest would be in loans. So that's 360 billion euros. So that's right. So part of it will be repaid. But even all of the money actually is conditional. So you mentioned already these countries have to submit a plan. They have to say what they use it for. There are conditions like a third of it has to go to projects that help preventing climate change or fighting climate change. 20% have to go to projects that are improving digitization. So there are conditions like that. And in addition, the countries have to do some reforms and say how they're going to do that, because the EU always tells countries that they need to do reforms. They have lists for each country. And this is also part of the plan that they have to submit the countries.
Thank you. And thank you for providing that background. I think that's very useful for our conversation. I mean, one of the things that Monika Schnitzer said was that the EU Recovery Fund was meant to deal with an unprecedented crisis and the severe economic shock that has affected different parts of Europe in different ways, but has affected everybody. My understanding was that this is very much a one-time solution to deal with the pandemic and not intended as something that could sort of extend for much longer than that. So in light of that, Michael Hüther, why did the German Constitutional Court block the ratification of the Recovery Fund?
First of all, I think you have to understand that what the German Constitutional Court did was only for a short period of time to say, please wait to the President of the Republic not to sign the law, because the people who asked the German Constitutional Court to do something, that there's something in danger, and we have to block this just definitely in a very short period of time. The Constitutional Court said in the end of March, yes, please wait to the President of the Republic. And then 4 weeks later, they said, yes, there may be some good arguments from the people who asked us to look on the new European financial architecture, which is defined by the Next Generation EU Fund. But the risks are not so high that we should block this definitely just no. So Frank-Walter Steinmeier then could sign the law from the German parliament in the end of April, in the last week. But behind this it's a general feeling of it is always the same group in Germany who asked the German Constitutional Court in the case of the PEP program, the pandemic purchase program designed from the ECB in March, April last year, or the former PSPP program and so on. They're still coming to the court, and there's something on the way that may change the European Union and change it to a liability union. They are keen on all risk of debt mutualization, and this is only in Germany the case, maybe a little bit in Austria, but in this sense that there's a strong political power asking for that and going to the Constitutional Court, this is more or less typical of the German debate, because I think it has something to do with our history of hyperinflation twice in the 20th century, and the shadow of hyperinflation is still on the German mind up to date. If I'm looking on this, may I add to what Monika said? Totally, I agree with what she explained, but only want to add, last year, when the shock of pandemic started in March, it was a symmetric shock to the economy, and all actors had to do something. So the ECB started to do something with the PEP program. The first step in April and May, the European member states were able to sign a first package, 450 billion euro, bring in the ESM, the European Stabilization Mechanism, created a new SURE program called SURE for the unemployment situation on the markets, and gave some additional credit lines for the European Investment Bank. So this was, and then the third step then was the Next Generation EU, and from today to the future, you may say what you said, it is a once in time instrument, will help us just to tackle the follow up of the pandemic crisis, and to give a new resilience to the European member states. And this week we had the first proposals made in Italy and also in Greece. And from Greece, you could say very. I'm impressed, I will say, what's the Greek government decided to do with the money which they can expect from Brussels or from this fund. Also from the speech of Prime Minister Draghi in the Italian parliament, who said we have to bring in all our reforms we never did before. So we have to do a lot to make our institutions more resilient, to open up labor market, to bring more people to sustainable jobs and so on. And then we are in the shape to use this money in a fruitful way. But you can also say that, and then to be a little bit more provocative, that this Next Generation EU may be a systematic second pillar of European financial architecture. The one is a medium-term financial framework. It's based on the specific payments from the member states, based on the value-added tax and the GDP share or definition. And this may be a second financial pillar for European investment activities. Infrastructure, decarbonization, digitization, all networks we have in Europe. So these are the two perspectives you can have just today, but it's not what the German finance minister said, the Hamiltonian moment of European Union. I totally disagree with that, but there is the chance or the risk, one would say, that this is also starting of a new design of European financial architecture.
So since you just brought up the Hamiltonian moment, we did just get a question from one of our viewers who mentions the name of Hamilton. And he writes, the young American Republic in Hamilton's time had direct access to revenues, mostly tariffs, to support its debt. The EU has only the budget contributions of its members to back its debt. Professor Dr. Schnitzer said that countries are obligated to step up their contributions if a country defaults. Where is this obligation to be found? Do either of you want to respond to that?
Just to the point, what you would say, in which is the regulation which is coming in here, or
where can one find, I guess, evidence of the fact that the countries that sort of are obligated to step it up if other countries default, where does that fit into a European agreement or a national agreement?
That's the basic idea of European cooperation and the solidarity inside the European Union, but it's very limited. So therefore, we have to do a lot to avoid such a situation. In this Next Generation EU, it's so important to see that there's a conditionality. They have to propose reform agendas, which they will fulfill the next period, and then they can match this with the money. So all we are doing is to avoid such a situation. But nobody knows what, for example, what will happen in capital markets, and the interest rates will rise again. If you will have a rise in interest rates, for example, the financial situation of the Italian state will be dramatic. And then you can have the question again on the table to the others, please give us some money to solve our problem we have here. And we are just at the situation, this risk is a severe one. But my understanding of the Next Generation EU Fund is to avoid such a thing, to have a clear conditionality, to use the money for investment in all the fields which are very important for the structural change of the economy and inside the agenda of the European Union, the Green European Union, the greening, digitalize our economy, and so on. So the risk may be there, but I would say this is the best we can do to avoid this risk.
So it seems to me. Yeah, please.
Yeah, can I second on that? I think this is exactly then where the political debate starts. So those who are very critical, they would argue, well, but I mean, it could happen that all other countries default, and then Germany will have to cough up 750 billion euro. And then at this point, we are not a master of our own budget anymore, and this violates our democracy principle. And this is exactly the case they are now making in front of the Constitutional Court, which is, of course, very far stretched. But I mean, that's exactly for the court now to decide. But as Michael Hüther just said, the idea is, of course, what would be the counterfactual? Say we did not have such a program, then also something can happen. So these countries can default, can get into even worse problems. And then we're still in a situation where, well, some of them are part of the monetary union, so we'll have to deal with that. Is that another crisis like we had with Greece? And at this point, we will also have to take measures, and they may be more costly in terms of economic downturn, in terms of real money that we will have to spend on this. So the question is always what the alternatives are. And as Michael Hüther said, it's exactly the idea that we want to prevent worse scenarios by helping.
It seemed to me that this was a very forward-looking stimulus package. Monika Schnitzer, as you mentioned, focusing on issues like climate change, like digitalization, areas where different member states, but the EU as a whole needs to make significant investment, as we do in the United States. And that this money, which comes out of necessity because of the pandemic and the economic crisis that many countries have been forced into, could actually be applied not just to getting out of the hole, but really to developing the infrastructure for the future in a number of areas. And it seems as if that is not a strong enough case for everybody. So maybe one question that I would have for you is Germany alone, or is the German court alone in its response? Because I'd like to get into this a little bit later. It seems to me that the political elite is in favor of the recovery package. The court is blocking it because of a complaint from a small minority. How is this playing out in other European countries, particularly the Frugal Four? Or are other countries going along with this more or less? I think more than 20 parliaments have already ratified the agreement.
Perhaps, okay, let me mention two countries where interesting things happen. I mean, Poland, for instance, is also very critical, but they are critical for other reasons. They are not afraid that they will need to foot the bill later on. They just don't like the conditionality. I mean, they have been blamed by the EU for not adhering to legal constraints, and the way they have dealt with the courts, for instance, throwing out judges. All this was a serious issue of concern in the EU. And hence, they are now worried that if they take the money, they will have to follow some of the rules that are set by the EU, and they don't like it. So you have issues here. In the Netherlands, interestingly, I mean, they are part of this Frugal Forum. They were very much critical of the whole thing. Now things are shifting a bit, so it's getting more European again. The finance minister, in particular, who was very much critical. There things change, and so it seems like the Netherlands is not opposed anymore.
Yeah, may I add to this point, because it's a very interesting one. You can see that we have different groups in the European Union which have different historical experiences, and these are still important today. For example, the transformation countries, former under the umbrella of the Soviet power, Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and so on. You see that they still have some distance, more pronounced distance towards Brussels, because we had a long time experience of centralized power from abroad and know what's going on in Brussels. So we need the transparency, and they will see that the European Union works for the people. And this has to do with their historical experience of 40 years in the communist order and under the Soviet power. In Germany, as I said, it's a historical criticism, but it's more pronounced in the public that we see this, for example, in the polls. If you mentioned that 74 members of parliament voted in favor of this law, you would ask the German, in more or less, I would say the large majorities in favor of the European integration. There is, I would be no doubt about it, but we see all around Europe, and that's another aspect, the movements on the right, on the political right. And these movements are critical towards centralization, towards debt mutualization, or the idea of a liability union. So this is always the same stuff they are putting to the people. We made a study asking what they are doing in European Parliament. It's interesting to see that the right-wing movements have no common sense. What they all have in line is criticism towards Brussels, but they have no common idea. They are voting alone, and no group is working really in tandem with the other. I think this is, I would say, a positive aspect, because then you can split up these groups. So in your question at the beginning, you're right, the German position is a specific one, because the German Constitutional Court has a very strong position in our constitution, and that's different to all the other member states. For example, in May last year, the decision of the court concerning the PSPP program of the ECB, Monika Schnitzer, Martin Hellwig, Peter Bofinger, Moritz Schularik, we wrote a piece on that in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, very critical, because it was not really easy to understand this decision of the European Constitutional, of the German Constitutional Court, saying that if the ECB is, we would say, doing something in line what is monetary policy, you will have side effects. And these side effects may have also some implications for some other actors in the economic world. It's quite clear, but it's not an argument against this interpretation of monetary policy. If you are looking on the decision of the German court, that was a very complicated world for the future, because the ECB has to, in this interpretation, or in my interpretation, then had to make a discussion with all European parliaments, with the French Assemblée Nationale, with the German Bundestag, and so on, to interpret and to make clear what is the sense of monetary policy. And this is totally not, I would say, in line with the European treaties. So you see, this is a very specific conflict we had. There's an ongoing conflict between the German Constitutional Court and the European Court of Justice, because the Germans say we are first in line, but then they know we are. And this is something to understand for our American friends. I think it's very important. And only one fact in the end, also for our American friends, the European budget is only a little bit more than 1% of the common GDP of European Union, the traditional budget. And the 740 billion Next Generation EU is less than that. So together, it's not 2% of the GDP of the European Union. Compare this to the central budget, which is defined in Washington.
Which actually, if I may add to that, which actually shows that what's really so important about the EU is rather the common grounds on rules. I mean, say competition rules, or I mean the common market. That's really what makes the EU. And of course, this having a budget and helping each other, and investing now in digitization, all this is an add-on so far. But even without the budget, the EU has a strong influence. Actually, that's the most important influence that we have. But this is now also showing that the people who are fighting these policies, they are not simply against Germany paying for it. They are against the EU in general. So this Alternative for Germany, which is basically the one that the party that is most opposed, so the populist party, they now have just voted on their program for the next election. And there they had a majority for saying, we actually want to leave the European Union. Now, this is no longer just about money. It's also, we don't want to have this common ground. We don't want to have these common rules anymore.
So what about this group, Citizens Will Alliance, that seems to be the group that actually submitted the complaint? Obviously, Eurosceptic, and they fit in that Eurosceptic camp. But what, I mean, the two of you have started to tell us a little bit about the kinds of people who are opposed to the recovery plan and who have instigated this. But what can you tell us about this group specifically?
I can start, and then perhaps you fill in. So it's a group founded by Bernd Lucke, who actually was the founder of the Alternative for Germany. At some point, the Alternative for Germany became so radically right-wing, verging towards Nazi movement. I mean, this is when he then actually left the party. And so he founded a couple of other things, and this is now one of his groups that he founded. And the idea is, well, we get together all the people who are critical of the euro as such, so the European Monetary Union, everything that has to do with rescue policy. So they were strongly opposed to helping Greece to stay in the Euro Monetary Union. So they're against the European Stability Mechanism, all this. Now, who are these people? These are some names one would recognize. These are economics professors, but then the question is, who else do they attract? And that's the interesting development in the Alternative for Germany. You saw that they started out as a group of people who were basically against the monetary union, and then they attracted more and more people who used this as a platform to promote their very right-wing ideas.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case. You can see that in the brain of an economist, there's room for very different approach and perspectives. And some of the economists, like Bernd Lucke, who started it was 2013, it was in 2012, 2013, in reaction to the crisis management in financial crisis and the debt crisis we had in the European Union. Were also people who came from a tradition saying that, yes, we are in favor of European integration, but in the sense of a coronation theory, the common currency could be only the last step. At first, we need a political union. And then when we will have reached a political union, the last step may be then a common currency. And as we all know, it was different, a little bit the way around, despite the fact that in 1988 or 1989, the European Council decided to start with two projects, the political integration or new idea of political union, which was first designed in the 1950s, and the second was the monetary integration. So the people coming from this and saying, this is our general criticism, we had the wrong start and the wrong design of monetary integration, and no, it's too much, and we step against this to the public. And then they attracted, as Monika Schnitzer said, a lot of people from the far right, from the extremist far right, I would say. And then the second topic they used was the migration, the refugee migration in 2015, 16, and so on. And as you know, in the parliamentary election 2017, they had 12.5% in the electoral vote. So this is a mix-up, and now they are coming back as the economist group. So they're always looking on what's the ECB doing? What's next generation EU? Maybe have an impact for the European financial architecture.
Thank you. I'd like to maybe spend a few minutes talking about the domestic, but also the European implications of this delay and how this is playing out. And before we look at other countries in Europe, I'd like to maybe shine the spotlight a little bit on Germany. As we all know, this is not just an election year, it is a Superwahljahr, and everybody has been very much focused on some state elections, but also, of course, on the jockeying for power within the different parties and who will the Kanzlerkandidat or Kandidatin be for the various parties. So I'd like to look a little bit at the political dimension of this. During a debate in Parliament, Chancellor Merkel said that this is an important tool. She insisted that it was a one-time event and could not be repeated. She was trying to, I think, address some of the concerns that we've been talking about already in this conversation. At the same time, Finance Minister Olaf Scholz from the SPD, who also supports the project, said that this marks an important first step toward a fiscal union in which member states would be able to, or would have to, transfer more power to Brussels and away from national capitals, which must have raised some of the concerns that the critics have had. I'd be interested in hearing from both of you about how this is playing out within the governing coalition of the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. And then after that, I'd like to take a question from one of our viewers who has a question about the Greens. Mm-hmm. Who would like to go first in terms of the political landscape?
Perhaps I could try to again put it in the legal perspective. It's true. This is a one-time thing because well, it's the first time that one uses a clause in the treaty that says, okay, there is a possibility to take on debt in exceptional cases, and this is in exceptional cases. So there is no way how you can now use this and say, well, we've done it, so we are now allowed to do this again and again and again, because each time you will use this clause, you will have to prove that this is an exceptional case, and you will have to take a unanimous vote. So in that sense, it's not simply now moving towards we will do this again and again. You will have to have a vote on that. Having said that, of course, it sets a precedent. I mean, yes, so we see that it can work. Well, hopefully it works. And you may actually then work with that, use that as a basis for further integration. Now, this is then where people differ, where political parties also differ, whether they actually want to move towards more integration, whether they actually want to have the EU or have its own taxes, for instance, levy its own taxes, not be relying anymore just on the contribution of the member states. There are different opinions here, and also whether we actually want to have more integration in terms of fiscal projects. So, well, even moving towards, say, having a joint military, or I mean, lots of European topics you might think of where it might be an idea to integrate more. But I think this is where the political lines run. So some people think it's better to have more integration. Others think that was a one-time thing, and that's it.
I think inside the coalition, they're still waiting for the end of September and the election day, because the hope is that they for the future won't have the chance to do it again. So both can have an interpretation on their own. the Social Democrats may say, as Monika Schnitzer said, that this is the new starting point for the fiscal union approach in Europe, and the CDU may say, oh no, that's only the one-time rescue package. We will strengthen the resilience of the European member states, and from this also the European Union as a whole. This is a good investment program. So until the elections, you can have both interpretations. And I think the argument from Finance Minister Scholz to say that's a fiscal union step or towards fiscal union, the amount is too small, and it's, as I said, it's only below 2% of the common GDP, the institutional interesting case is that they try to do it inside the existing treaties, because the regulation, the treaty said they had to define a new source of revenue, and they defined loans as a source of revenue. And in history, we have the fact that in 1975, the former European communities once gave to the market European bonds, a small amount, but these European bonds was used to manage a current account problem the Republic of Italy had. So this is not out of range. We do have this historical experience, but for the future, I think the most important development for future decisions is is it successful in the idea of conditionality? Is it successful to bring member states with a less resilient structure to improve their institutions, to improve their market structure, and so on? So is the Italian program a reliable one, or is the Greek program? If this will be the case, and we will have the proof of the pudding, so to say, in 2023, 24, this may change the situation. But if this is the idea is to strengthen Europe, if this will be the outcome, it will change the debate, the future debate.
Thank you both. Let me now invite one of our members here in New York, Tara Hariharan, to weigh in with her question. Tara, go ahead. Your mic should be on.
Thank you so much. My question is just drilling down further into the recent rise in popularity of the Greens party in Germany. Do you panelists believe that this is signaling, because of the popularity of the Greens, that this is signaling a shift in public German sentiment also towards a more expansionary fiscal policy in Germany, as well as more of an appetite for fiscal burden sharing by Germany with the rest of Europe? Thank you.
Michael, you were nodding your head a little bit.
The Greens are an interesting party because they're very strong to the idea, committed to the idea of sustainability. Sustainability in the environmental policy interpretation, but also in the fiscal policy interpretation. So if you look on the program they delivered to the public a few weeks ago for the parliamentary election, there's a clear saying that we will open up our debt brake for more public investment, but we will stick to sound fiscal policies also in the future. So they don't ask for higher amount of credit financed public expenditures, but for a specific one. So you may say this is in line with the Next Generation EU on the European level. They ask for investment program or investment fund on the German level. But traditionally, the German Greens stick to the solid fiscal policy approach. So this is not the same to say, oh, there's no limitation for public activities or public financing or public debt. This will be different. Therefore, the Greens are in a situation to match a coalition program with the CDU. That will be possible. It was not possible 4 years or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and also not in 2013. But this time they will try, and they will have to make some compromises.
Also, I wouldn't overinterpret. I wouldn't overinterpret that they are now rising in popularity. It definitely reflects that there are very few opposition parties right now, and they are at this point the most attractive opposition party to all those who are not happy with the government at this point. So I mean, this is in a way a consequence of having the two largest parties form a coalition now for a couple of times. I mean, one of the two parties is not so large anymore, but there was very little opposition left, and the Greens have been very successful in picking up all the votes. I mean, with the exception of the far right, of course, that's something different, or far left, but they've been very successful in picking up votes from mainstream people, so people in the middle of the political sphere.
Germany is becoming a more normal state if you're looking on the structure of political parties, for example. When I was at school time, it was quite clear that we had only three parties: the Social Democrats, the Christian Union, and the Liberal Party, and they will mix up because all the time we have a stable situation in parliament. In this time, nobody would say that we should ever have a right-wing party for a long time. And there's some historical specific events in the late 60s, but later on only at the fringe of the system. So the general idea was we will have stable parties in the middle of the marketplace, so to say, and there's no chance for a right-wing extremist party to come into the parliament, at least on the federal level. This has changed, and from this you can say that look on the Parti Socialiste in France, on the Socialist Party in Italy, or Democrazia Cristiana. They are all faded away. They are no more on the scene. The Parti for the Arbeit in the Netherlands. So this is the traditional structures we had in the 1970s, 1980s, a little bit in the 1990s, are changing dramatically, and Germany is not standing out of this structural change of the public. This has to do with the public debate, with the high level of wealth we have, the different aspiration to environmental politics and so on. But in this, you may also say that Germany is becoming more and more normal.
So while we're talking about party politics, one last question before we move on to another topic. One of our viewers is curious as to the FDP's, the Free Democrats' position on this issue specifically, but on European integration as a whole.
The liberals are something in between. On the one hand, they see the competition from the right-wing AfD, who are some conservative, liberal-minded people have moved on. They have this criticism towards the European integration going too far. So they are in favor of liberal markets, for open markets. They have a strong criticism towards the Brussels bureaucracy. And they still stick very close, very narrow to the debt brake regulation, to all the debt regulation we have on national and a European level. So they are not so far away from a critical position towards Europe, but they try to bring this together with more reform ideas and to open up the system, to have a competition, better in more intensive competition on all markets in Europe. So this is, yeah, the FDP is something a little bit in between, and they're just now in the polls around 10%. It's a strong number for this party. Imagine that in 2013 they were not successful to come into the parliament. They were below 5%. We have this 5% hurdle. Yeah. So this is the FDP is interesting case. Yeah.
So obviously Europe has been a thread throughout our conversation today, both in terms of individual countries, Europe as a whole. But I'd like to take a step back a little bit and talk a little bit about the implications of this roadblock in Germany for the rest of Europe. Obviously, countries like Italy and Spain that have been severely hit by the pandemic are waiting for an infusion of money so that they can jumpstart their economies. I think it's fair to say that these recovery funds are more important than ever as the infection rates continue to go up or at least remain stable, as there are more strict lockdowns, and as the COVID situation does not improve. My understanding is that the hope had been that the European Commission would start raising funds this summer to make them available for the member states in the second half of this year. So basically 1 year after the initial agreement was made. A question to both of you, do you think that that is still possible, that this money will be released or in one form or another in the second half of the year?
So personally, I think yes. I mean, what's slowing down the whole process is, of course, also that the member states now have to hand in their plans. These plans will have to be looked at. There will be negotiations. There will be discussions in the end. There's no way of actually rejecting the plan, but there can be very, very prolonged discussions about the plans if they're not fulfilling the requirements. So this can take some time, but other than that, I think things are moving now in the right direction.
And there was a time limit up to the end of April. The national recovery plans had to be not only discussed internally, but also with the European Commission. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, in Italy and Greece, we just had the outcome. They did it, and they sent this 4,004 pages from Italy to Brussels with all these ideas of structural reform and investment. The same was the case in Germany. This week, the finance minister and the cabinet decided on the German recovery and resilience plan. So this is on the way, and the European Commission have to decide. There may be a technical problem behind. On the European level, they do not have any experience in managing financial market and to bring bonds to the market. So as you see, for example, in Germany, we have for long, from the beginning on, the Bundesschuldenverwaltung, the federal debt management, which now was transformed 15 years ago to the financial agency. It's called German Financial Agency. It's managing also different tasks, but it was just to have a market-based management of the public debt, to lower the interest rate by doing this in a very sophisticated way. On the European level, they do not have any experience on that because they never had to bring bonds to the market, also, as I said, in 1975 once. From this may happen some technical problems because not so easy to bring the financial market experts you need to Brussels. This is not really a financial hotspot, but this is only a technical aspect, but we should only aware on that is a new quality, because if you once have the competence, the capacity on the Brussels scene on managing public debt, that will ask for future activities. That may be also part of the changing institutional setting.
What about the optics for Germany? Over the course of the last couple of years, as there have been sovereign debt crises, as there have been European financial crises, the Mediterranean countries in Southern Europe have been very critical of Germany's position, sort of holding up other stimulus packages. Is the same thing happening now with regard to this bump in the road, or is it not playing out as much in those countries?
I'm not sure to what extent they really took a note of the specific issues that played out, because in the end, I mean, it was approved, so the president signed the bill. But I think the reason why Germany actually, together with France, fought so hard for this recovery fund was that so far they were also always viewed as the country which is keeping its pockets tight and not really helping other countries. And so this was really the momentum they wanted to take, to actually show, well, yeah, there is solidarity, it's important. And as I said in the beginning, one of the main motivations was to say, well, here there is no one to blame. We all were hit by this crisis and it was nobody's fault. Mind you, there are still people saying, well, but if some countries had not put on so much debt, then they would be in better shape to get their own loans. Look what we have done. Yes, there are these people, but in general, I mean, that is not the common sentiment. The common sentiment is it's nobody's fault. So we have to show some solidarity.
I think it was a signal to the other European member states from the German government when they decided in last summer to stick to this idea and to make a big step forward on that. Despite all these different interpretations we will have on the CDU side and the SPD side, but the chancellor in itself, Merkel, said, yeah, that's a good idea. We have to make a step. And the second point is the management of conditionality is transferred to the European level. This has nothing to do with Germany. So each individual member state had to decide what they will bring to the proposal and for the usage of money and the combination with structural reforms. The third aspect is this, just before this afternoon, we had our Institute's colloquium, and we had a guest speaker from Rome, the journalist Pillar, who is for 30 years for Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in Rome. And it was really amazing to hear in which way in Italy, more or less for all problems they have, in the public, they blame Germany. Everything. Everything is, if there's something wrong, it has nothing to do with Italy. It's always the reason is in Berlin. In former time, it was in Bonn, at Helmut Kohl, and now it's in Angela Merkel. It's always the same. And this is really a risk. So we do what we need is a public sphere in Europe. We do not have this already. And the public, the civil societies have to move together to understand Europe from a common perspective. And this is really a political game in Italy to blame Germany for all the problems they have. So if the money is coming, then the conditionality is a German bad idea behind. If the money is not coming, these are the Germans as well. So this is, you should never overseen this. It's maybe not so transparent to the other side of the Atlantic, but I still was surprised this afternoon when Tobias Piller explained to us that this is really the ongoing narratives they have.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, and I think it's important for us to keep that in mind as we think about the future of Europe. And so perhaps as we start to wrap up here, earlier in our conversation, Michael Hüther mentioned that this is not the first time that the German Constitutional Court has raised questions about what it perceives to be risky EU integration measures. Michael, I think you gave an example of the court ruling that part of the European Central Bank's government bond purchasing program was illegal under German law. That was something that happened last May. And I guess the question I would have for each of you is, are there any more battles like this on the horizon? Do you see any other issues that could come up that could also prove to be difficult?
My expectation is there will be many more, as long as there will be measures taken like the one. Because as we said, this group, this political group, whether they are now a member of this party or of this particular group, or whether they are fringe members of some of the larger parties, they will try to fight this. The question is, how successful will they be, and to what extent at some point, by changing the rules, it can be made more secure that this is really constitutional, so that it doesn't raise any more doubts. But I think on a political agenda, there will always be this discussion, even if it's not fought at the court anymore. As I said, I mean, one party really now wants to move out of the European Union, and so we'll have this discussion.
I mean, of course, to that, just as a quick footnote to that, of course, it remains to be seen if the AfD will pass the 5% hurdle in the next election. It probably will, given how it's polling at the moment. It probably will be included in the next parliament. But there is obviously so much that can happen between now and September in terms of how each of the parties fares, whether they make mistakes, whether they have successes. And that, of course, will drive where the voters go.
What we could see in the last year since the outbreak of the pandemic, the right-wing party was not so successful as in the past. They could not use the pandemic politics as some more water on their own movement. So they are below 10%, or at least like 10%. It will be a smaller outcome in the electoral vote, just for the time being. Maybe we will see an ongoing vaccination of the population, and we will be more stronger, than they could be even smaller, the outcome for the right-wing party. But we should not forget that one is on the line. It's in the ask for the ruling of the German Constitutional Court is concerning the pandemic, the emergency purchase program designed in last end of March and April for the ECB acting in pandemic crisis. And we will expect, we have to wait for the definite ruling from the court on the Next Generation EU. Just know that he only decided that the president can sign the law, and then the treaty will come into effect. But we will see what will come out, and to understand why it's so important, or why it will happen or may happen. The argument is, there are two argumentations behind. The first is already mostly the debt mutualization fear. The fear for we have to pay for the other. We have to bring our money to Brussels or to Rome or whatever, and this is not in line with the authority of our parliament to define to define the structure and the volume of the public budget. And the second argument is always in usage of our court, is saying the identity of the constitution. What does that mean? The constitutional identity is that there should be no interference from abroad in the fields of politics which are still on the national level. This has something to do with the principle of subsidiarity. And this is more important for all the German debates, because we do have this federal structure. We have subsidiarity in our state organization, and we bring this to the multi-level system of the European Union. The idea of subsidiarity has no other European state the same popularity or the same importance for the public and political debate. So this is in line with the argument. So that makes clear that if there's some other group coming and asking for a ruling of the German Constitutional Court, in his tradition, looking on the debt mutualization, looking on the mandate for some European institutions, and looking on the identity of the Constitution, there's always an open door to say something to that. And this will be open.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important point. Perhaps in the minute that we have left, if I could ask each of you in 30 to 40 seconds to tell us what you're watching as this continues to unfold in the months ahead. What should our viewers pay attention to if they want to sort of follow these developments closely?
No, they have to look at the administrative acting. So no, we are on the way to do it. And what are the national recovery and resilience plans? And this will work. Then the debate will be more will calm down on the European level, and it's a question of acting. And the next 6 months, I would suppose, is not really a period of surprise from Europe, from European level, from Brussels. Look on the German scene.
On a much more general level, I think it's worthwhile watching the debate as such about the integration of the European Union. I think what really hit us very strongly was this Brexit surprise. And I think that really made people pull themselves together and really work more closely, because they want to avoid another one of these incidences. We all see what a catastrophe that is. I mean, for all the countries involved, not just for the UK, but for the EU as well. And so that will be an interesting development to watch to what extent that now lasts in making the rest of the member states pull themselves together and really work towards keeping the integration or even furthering the integration.
Mm-hmm. Well, Monika Schnitzer and Michael Hüther, I want to thank you for unpacking this topic with us. I have certainly learned a lot over the course of the last hour, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. This has been really interesting to gain your insights on this, and I want to thank you for making the time on a Friday evening in Germany. And I wish you a very pleasant weekend and hope that you both stay well.
Thank you so
It's a
much.
pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.